In today's Mobile Mind, we will explore planning for student engagement through components of a lesson plan. When planning instruction, these four components should be integrated into the lesson. Done well, the components can maximize student learning. In this intro course, we will explain each component and offer a couple suggestions to plan for student engagement in each component. It should be noted that these components can be placed strategically in the lesson, resulting in a personalized path for teachers and students. Each lesson should include a launch, active learning, student-independent learning, and a closure of that lesson. Embedded within each component should be planned student engagement opportunities to maximize student learning. Let's start with the lesson launch. This is usually around 10 minutes long. The purposes for the launch are to establish the goals for the lesson, activate prior learning, introduce a new activity, and hold space for important SEL and community building spaces with intention. The launch can be done in small groups or as a large group. Here are some ways to engage students in the lesson launch. You could open the lesson with a chat debate, such as this or that. Maybe students can construct a 6-word summary from the lesson prior. Or students can work together to construct goals for the lesson. Next, teachers can plan for active learning, which can last as long as 30 minutes. Teachers may even consider chunking time to do 10 minutes of active learning, followed by student-independent learning, and back for 10 minutes of active learning. It's important to note that this component involves the teacher directly. The purposes for the active learning are for students to engage with the teacher through activities and discussion. However, students should still be actively engaging. This can also be done in small groups or as a large group. Here are some ways to engage students in active learning. Teachers could facilitate and map a discussion, or direct instruct using an interactive pear deck or class flow. The teacher may have students take notes while viewing a demonstration lecture. The next component of a lesson is a student-independent learning. Teachers should plan at least 40 minutes of interactive student learning. While the teacher is available, students should work either independently or with a small group to connect and solidify their new learning or prepare for upcoming learning through a variety of options, including reading, writing, watching a video, or preparing for a discussion. Breakout rooms are great for these purposes, where students have an independent task to complete, but can rely on a small group for the first tier of questions. Here are some ways to engage students in the independent learning. Students could plan a web quest for students to explore. They may also find use in a hyperdoc, where students apply their newly learned content and/or skills. Students may also learn independently while taking part in a jigsaw reading, collaborative document, or presentation. As long as students are clear on their engagement and application of learning, this can be very valuable time. It should be mentioned that this time can also be chunked to best meet the needs of the learning and students. Perhaps the teacher begins with a student-independent learning, then pulls the group back after 15 minutes to complete a quick correction or mini lesson, and then has students return for another 30 minutes to their independent learning. This flexibility should be embraced by teachers to ensure students are maximizing their engagement and learning. The final component of lessons is a lesson closure. This is usually around 10 minutes long. While it may seem that this naturally goes at the end of class, teachers should again use the closure at the end of a learning session or when a learning target or goal has been achieved. This may be halfway through the class time, with a new launch coming shortly. The purposes for the closure is to give students the opportunity to summarize main ideas, evaluate processes, answer beginning questions, and link information to prior and future learning. Again, this should be the student's closing class, so this can be done in small or large groups. Here are some ways to engage students in the closure. You could close a lesson with a 6-word summary of the lesson. Or maybe every student needs to leave a question in a common space, like Padlet or Jamboard or in the chat. Students could also close the lesson with a write, share, write, where they write the answer to a previously posed question, share their idea with a partner, and then reflect again after sharing. This can help solidify the lesson's learning. Here is one example from a social studies classroom. Notice how the teacher has planned through each component the time frame, the topic, and the plan for students to engage. Highlighted are direct student responsibilities and are shared with students throughout the lesson. For the launch, the teacher uses the chat feature and the hand raise feature to engage students in 2 activities at once, attendance and summarizing. In the active learning portion, the teacher has an interactive slide deck and guides students to take notes on paper or in Google Docs. The importance of that note-taking is relevant immediately following, where students apply those notes and skills during independent work time, where they view sources and create claims supported by evidence in a hyperdoc or hyperslide. During the lesson closure, the group comes back together to talk through their independent work and clear up any misapplication or misinformation. This next example is from a pre-calculus classroom. Again, the teacher plans through each component with a time frame, topic to cover, and student engagement plan. In the launch, the teacher warms up the chat by asking a daily question or causing a debate. Her counter purpose of this is to forge a stronger community and take a temperature check of students. Next, during active learning, students are again taking notes on their own paper while the teacher explains the process of a problem. She breaks every 3 to 4 minutes for students to apply the learning to their own problem. During independent student learning, the teacher uses Google breakout rooms to facilitate a small group activity while she stays in the main Google Meet room. Students can pop in for individual questions, or she can pull students into the main room for quick interventions. The small group work from this day was a collaborative Google slide where students worked through several steps of a problem, applying various math concepts. However, before moving to the next slide to begin the next problem, students needed to check on another's work, as a wrong number impacted the solution of the next problem. The next slide shows how the teacher created that engagement tool. Finally, in the lesson closure, the teacher brought the students back, and each group shared their missing steps. This created an atmosphere where various groups helped each other problem solve, so the teacher was facilitator. Here is a still frame of that small group student work. Each group had these same 5 slides to work through, with a new problem on each slide. On this slide, Ava was in charge of finding all the rational zeros, but on the next slide, Ava was responsible for Descartes' rule of signs. Meanwhile, Gabe completed Descartes' rule of signs on this slide and moved to testing for zeros on slide 2, and so on. Remember, this was in the students' own breakout room, but they could elect to pop into the main meet where their teacher could lend individual support. After seeing those 2 examples, remember that you do these all the time. When structuring your lesson plan, remind yourself that every day is a different day. There may be times when teachers switch up the order of events or try a new strategy. As long as there is no sacrifice to the strategies that maximize your students' learning, be creative. Timing is everything. Too much time without a planned engagement and students will create their own. Then again, students cannot achieve flow in their learning with too little time to engage with a task. Be purposeful in your engagement, planning, and consider, what information will students need? What tools and materials will students need? And what's your role as a teacher during each of the components of the lesson? At which component do you most successfully and intentionally engage students? Are you a master at engaging students at the launch? Does the active learning come alive through your use of student engagement? Or are students fully invested and best engaged through your planning of their own independent learning? Maybe you capture the best engagement in closing the lesson. Share your answer through Mobile Minds.